Picture this. You're standing on the deck of a research vessel, staring out at an endless expanse of blue water. Below you, hidden beneath miles of crushing darkness, lies the largest construction site humanity has never touched. The ocean floor. 71% of our planet's surface, mostly unexplored, mostly unchanged since the dawn of time. But what if that was about to change? What if we had the power to reshape the very foundation of our seas? Today, we're diving into one of the most ambitious questions our species has ever dared to ask. Not just could we engineer the ocean floor, but should we? And before you think this is pure science fiction, let me tell you something that might surprise you. The technology to fundamentally alter underwater landscapes isn't decades away. It's happening right now in small pockets around the world, and the implications are staggering. I'm talking about artificial reefs that grow faster than nature ever intended, underwater cities designed to house millions, mining operations that could literally move mountains beneath the waves. And here's the thing that'll keep you up at night. Some of the biggest players in tech and engineering are already placing their bets on this underwater revolution. We're not just talking about building on the ocean floor. We're talking about completely reimagining it. But here's where it gets really interesting, and why this isn't just another futuristic fantasy. The ocean floor is the last great frontier on Earth that we haven't completely messed with yet. And depending on how you look at it, that's either humanity's greatest opportunity or our most dangerous temptation. Because once we start engineering down there, there's no going back. Now, I know what you're thinking. We can barely manage the land we've already got. So why would we want to start tinkering with the ocean floor? Well, the answer to that question is going to challenge everything you thought you knew about our planet's future. And by the end of this deep dive, you'll understand why some of the world's brightest minds are convinced that engineering the ocean floor isn't just possible, it's inevitable. Let me start with something that happened just last year that barely made the news, but probably should have been front page everywhere. Off the coast of Japan, a team of engineers successfully deployed what they're calling a living building. Not a building that houses living things, but a structure that literally grows itself, using a combination of engineered coral, biocement, and something they're not quite ready to tell us about yet. In 6 months, this thing expanded from the size of a school bus to something you could fit a small town inside. Think about that for a second. We're not just talking about dropping concrete blocks on the ocean floor anymore. We're talking about structures that adapt, that evolve, that respond to their environment in real time. And if that doesn't make you pause and wonder what we're really getting ourselves into, then you're not paying attention. But that's just the beginning. Because while one team in Japan is growing buildings, another group in Norway has figured out how to essentially 3D print entire underwater valleys. They're using a process called hydrosculpting, where massive underwater robots reshape sediment and rock formations like they're working with clay. Last month, they carved out an underwater canyon system that's already showing signs of creating its own unique ecosystem. And then there's what's happening off the coast of California, where a startup nobody's heard of is testing something they call ocean floor terraforming. I'm not even sure I fully understand what they're doing, but from what I've gathered, they're basically creating underwater weather systems. Controlled currents, temperature zones, artificial pressure gradients. They're not just building on the ocean floor, they're redesigning how the ocean floor works. Now, here's where this gets really wild. All of these projects, scattered across the globe, aren't just random experiments. They're all connected to something much bigger. Something that, if it works, could change the entire way our species thinks about living space, resources, and our relationship with the planet. You see, there's a problem we don't talk about enough. Earth is running out of room. Not just room for people, though that's part of it. Room for cities, for agriculture, for all the infrastructure that keeps our civilization running. And while everyone's looking up at Mars and talking about space colonies, a small group of visionaries looked down and realized we've been ignoring the most obvious solution. The ocean covers more than 2/3 of our planet, and we've barely scratched the surface of what's possible down there. But here's the thing that makes this so much more complex than just building underwater cities. The ocean floor isn't empty space waiting for us to fill it. It's one of the most important ecosystems on our planet, and we're only just beginning to understand how it works. Every time we send a probe to the deep ocean, we discover new forms of life, new chemical processes, new connections that keep our entire planet in balance. So the question isn't really just whether we can engineer the ocean floor. The question is whether we can do it without destroying the very systems that keep our planet habitable. And that's where things get really interesting, because some of the most cutting-edge ocean floor engineering projects aren't just trying to avoid damaging existing ecosystems. They're trying to improve them. Take what's happening in the Maldives right now. You know the Maldives, those picture-perfect islands that are slowly disappearing as sea levels rise? Well, instead of just accepting their fate, they've partnered with a team of marine engineers to literally grow new islands from the ocean floor up. But here's the brilliant part. They're not just creating land. They're creating super ecosystems that are more resilient, more biodiverse, and more capable of adapting to climate change than the natural reefs they're replacing. The process is almost like magic. They start with a framework, kind of like underwater scaffolding, but made from materials that marine life loves to grow on. Then, they introduce carefully selected species of coral, algae, and other organisms that work together to build up the structure. Within a few years, you've got a thriving underwater mountain that's actually healthier than most natural reefs. And the crazy part? These engineered ecosystems are showing resistance to problems that are killing natural reefs all over the world. Ocean acidification, rising temperatures, pollution, the engineered reefs are handling it all better than nature's original designs. Which raises a question that's going to make you uncomfortable. What if human engineering can actually improve on millions of years of evolution? Now, before you start thinking this all sounds too good to be true, let me tell you about the problems. Because there are problems, and some of them are the kind that could fundamentally alter life on Earth in ways we can't predict. First, there's the scale issue. The projects I've mentioned so far are tiny compared to what some people are proposing. We're talking about engineering projects that would make the Great Wall of China look like a garden fence, underwater mountain ranges, artificial ocean currents that could redirect global weather patterns, cities on the ocean floor that could house hundreds of millions of people. The amount of resources, energy, and coordination required for projects like this is almost incomprehensible. We're talking about moving more earth and rock than has been moved in the entire history of human construction, except we'd be doing it underwater, under crushing pressure, in an environment that's actively hostile to almost every technology we've ever developed. But the technical challenges might actually be the easy part, because the real question isn't whether we can do this. The real question is what happens to everything else when we do. The ocean floor isn't just a foundation for marine life. It's a massive carbon sink, storing more carbon than all the forests on land combined. It's a crucial part of global ocean currents that regulate temperature and weather patterns around the world. It's home to ecosystems we're only just discovering, including organisms that might hold the keys to everything from new medicines to solutions for climate change. Start engineering on a massive scale, and you're not just building structures. You're potentially disrupting systems that have been stable for millions of years. And unlike building a city on land, where you can see the immediate effects of what you're doing, ocean floor engineering could trigger changes that don't show up for decades. By the time we realize we've made a mistake, it might be too late to fix it. Which brings us to something that's going to sound like paranoia, but probably isn't. Some of the most ambitious ocean floor engineering proposals aren't coming from environmental groups or research institutions. They're coming from the same kinds of organizations that brought us industrial agriculture, strip mining, and urban sprawl. Companies that have a track record of prioritizing short-term profits over long-term sustainability. And that should terrify you, because the ocean floor represents the last major ecosystem on Earth that's still mostly intact. Once we start large-scale engineering down there, we're essentially committing to managing the entire ocean system forever. There's no going back to natural processes once you've fundamentally altered the foundation they depend on. But here's the twist that's going to keep you thinking about this long after this video ends. We might not have a choice. Climate change is accelerating faster than most people realize. Sea levels are rising, ocean temperatures are climbing, and entire marine ecosystems are collapsing. The traditional approach of trying to preserve what we have might not be enough anymore. We might actually need to engineer our way out of the mess we've created. And that's where ocean floor engineering stops being a choice and starts being a necessity. Because here's what's happening right now. While we're debating whether we should mess with the ocean floor is changing anyway. Rising temperatures are shifting ocean currents. Acidification is dissolving the calcium carbonate shells that countless organisms depend on. Dead zones are expanding as pollution disrupts the delicate chemical balance that keeps marine ecosystems alive. In other words, we're already engineering the ocean floor. We're just doing it accidentally, chaotically, and with results that nobody planned for. The question isn't whether human activity is going to reshape the deep ocean. The question is whether we're going to do it intentionally, with some chance of getting the results we actually want. This is where things get really complicated, because the line between restoration and engineering isn't as clear as you might think. Take what's happening in the Gulf of Mexico right now. The dead zone there, an area where oxygen levels are so low that almost nothing can survive, covers an area about the size of Massachusetts. It's been growing for decades, fed by agricultural runoff from the Mississippi River. Traditional approaches to fixing this have focused on reducing the pollution going into the river system. And that's important, but it's also slow, expensive, and politically complicated. So a team of marine engineers decided to try something different. They're building what they call oxygen gardens on the ocean floor. Structures that actively pump oxygen into the water while filtering out the excess nutrients that feed the dead zone. Early results are promising. The areas around these oxygen gardens are showing signs of life returning. Fish populations are recovering. The water is getting clearer. But here's the catch. These aren't natural systems anymore. They require constant maintenance, constant monitoring, constant adjustment. We've essentially committed to managing that part of the ocean floor forever. And that raises a question that's going to define the next century of human development. Are we comfortable becoming the permanent managers of Earth's natural systems? Because once you start down that path, there's no halfway point. You either commit to active management or you watch the systems you've altered collapse. Now, let me tell you about something that's happening in the South China Sea that most people don't know about, but probably should. Several countries in the region have been quietly experimenting with what they call adaptive ocean floor modification. Officially, it's about creating new fishing grounds and protecting coastal areas from rising sea levels. Unofficially, it's about something much more significant. They're building underwater territories, not just structures on the ocean floor, but actual extensions of their national boundaries. Artificial islands that grow from the seafloor up, complete with their own ecosystems, their own resources, and their own strategic value. And here's the thing that should make everyone pay attention. These aren't just engineering projects, they're geopolitical weapons. Because whoever controls the technology to engineer the ocean floor effectively controls access to the largest unexplored resource base on the planet. We're talking about mineral deposits worth trillions of dollars. Fishing grounds that could feed billions of people. Strategic positions that could dominate global shipping routes. The ocean floor isn't just a construction site. It's the next great arena for international competition. And that competition is already starting to reshape how we think about sovereignty, territory, and resource rights. Traditional maritime law assumes that the ocean floor is mostly empty space with some scattered resources. But what happens when the ocean floor becomes engineered, managed, actively developed territory? Who owns an artificial reef that spans multiple countries' territorial waters? Who's responsible when an engineered ecosystem starts affecting natural systems hundreds of miles away? These aren't theoretical questions anymore. Legal battles over engineered ocean floor territories are already working their way through international courts. And the precedents being set now are going to determine whether ocean floor engineering becomes a collaborative effort to solve global problems or a new source of conflict that could destabilize entire regions. But let's step back from the geopolitical implications for a moment and talk about something even more fundamental. What does it mean to be human when we have the power to redesign the foundation of our planet? For most of human history, we've seen ourselves as separate from nature. We've built our cities, farmed our land, and generally tried to create spaces where we could live comfortably while keeping the wild world at a safe distance. But ocean floor engineering represents something completely different. We're not just building in nature, we're becoming nature. We're taking on the role of geological and biological forces that have shaped the planet for millions of years. And I'm not sure we're psychologically prepared for that responsibility. Because when you're engineering ecosystems, every decision you make affects countless species in ways you can't fully predict. When you're reshaping ocean currents, you're potentially altering weather patterns that affect billions of people. When you're building structures that are designed to last for centuries, you're making choices that will constrain the options available to future generations. There's a project starting next year off the coast of Iceland that really drives this home. They're planning to build what they're calling a thermal management system for the North Atlantic. Basically, they want to use the geothermal energy that's abundant in that region to create controlled temperature zones on the ocean floor. The idea is to counteract some of the warming that's disrupting Arctic ecosystems. On paper, it sounds brilliant. Use clean, renewable energy to actively cool parts of the ocean and give endangered species a chance to adapt to climate change. But think about what that actually means. We'd be taking control of ocean temperatures across thousands of square miles. We'd be deciding which species survive and which don't. We'd be managing the thermal dynamics of an entire ocean basin. That's not engineering. That's playing God with planetary systems. And once you start down that path, where do you stop? Because here's what nobody's talking about in all the excitement over ocean floor engineering. Every system we engineer becomes a system we have to maintain. Every artificial reef needs monitoring. Every underwater city needs infrastructure. Every thermal management system needs constant adjustment. We're not just building things on the ocean floor. We're committing future generations to become full-time ocean managers. And what happens when we can't keep up with that commitment? What happens when the technology fails, or the funding runs out, or political priorities shift? Natural ecosystems can recover from disturbances, but engineered systems often can't. When an artificial reef collapses, it doesn't just return to the way things were before. It often becomes a toxic waste site that makes the surrounding area uninhabitable for decades. So we're not just asking whether we should engineer the ocean floor, we're asking whether we're ready to take responsibility for maintaining those engineered systems forever. And whether we trust future generations to honor the commitments we're making today. Now, let me show you something that's going to change how you think about all of this. There's a place in the Pacific Ocean where nature has already been experimenting with rapid ecosystem engineering for millions of years. It's called the Mariana Trench, and what's happening down there is giving scientists ideas that could revolutionize how we approach ocean floor modification. Deep in the trench, there are organisms that literally build their own environments. They secrete materials that create structures, modify chemical conditions, and establish microclimates that allow entire communities of life to thrive in conditions that would be instantly lethal anywhere else on Earth. And they do it all without any external energy source, without any maintenance, without any management from above. Scientists are now trying to reverse engineer these natural processes to create what they call bio-integrated ocean floor systems. Instead of building artificial structures and trying to maintain them, they're developing ways to guide natural organisms to build the structures we need. It's like having a construction crew that feeds itself, repairs its own equipment, and gets better at its job over time. Early experiments with this approach are showing incredible promise. Bio-integrated systems can adapt to changing conditions in ways that traditional engineering never could. They can self-repair when damaged. They can even evolve new capabilities as their environment changes. And because they're based on natural processes, they're much more likely to integrate smoothly with existing ecosystems. But here's the catch that's going to blow your mind. These bio-integrated systems are so sophisticated, so complex, that we're not entirely sure how they work. We can guide them, we can influence them, but we can't fully control them. We're essentially partnering with natural processes that are smarter than we are. And that brings us to the real question at the heart of ocean floor engineering. Are we trying to impose human will on natural systems? Or are we trying to become better partners with the intelligence that's already built into the natural world? Because the more we learn about ocean ecosystems, the more we realize that they're not just random collections of organisms competing for resources. They're integrated information processing systems that have been solving complex problems for millions of years. Problems like resource distribution, waste management, energy optimization, and adaptive response to environmental changes. All the problems we're trying to solve with our engineering projects? Maybe the question isn't whether we should engineer the ocean floor. Maybe the question is whether we're smart enough to learn from the engineering that's already there. Which leads us to something that happened 3 months ago that's going to completely reframe this entire conversation. A research team working in the abyssal plains of the Atlantic Ocean made a discovery that nobody saw coming. They were testing a new type of underwater sensor network when they stumbled across something that shouldn't exist. Structures on the ocean floor that appeared to be artificial, but were clearly millions of years old. Now, before you start thinking ancient aliens, let me explain what they actually found. These weren't buildings or monuments. They were patterns in the sediment, geometric arrangements of minerals, and most importantly, evidence of what can only be described as prehistoric ocean floor modification. Something, probably microbial communities working over geological timescales, had been systematically engineering the deep ocean environment long before complex life even existed. The implications hit the research team like a freight train. We've been approaching ocean floor engineering like we're the first species to ever have this idea. But what if we're not? What if ecosystem engineering is actually a fundamental property of life itself, something that happens naturally whenever organisms become sophisticated enough to modify their environment on a large scale? This discovery is forcing scientists to completely reconsider what we mean by natural versus artificial. Because if life has been engineering ocean floor systems for millions of years, then maybe our current projects aren't as revolutionary as we thought. Maybe we're just the latest participants in a process that's been going on since life began. But here's where it gets really interesting. These ancient engineered systems aren't just historical curiosities, they're still active. The mineral patterns are still growing, still changing, still responding to environmental conditions. And when the research team started analyzing how these systems work, they realized something that's going to change everything we think we know about large-scale engineering. These prehistoric systems are completely sustainable. They've been operating continuously for millions of years without any external maintenance, without depleting their resources, without creating waste products that accumulate and cause problems. They're not just engineered systems, they're perfect engineered systems. And that's when someone on the research team asked the question that's been keeping marine engineers awake at night ever since. What if, instead of trying to engineer the ocean floor ourselves, we figured out how to work with these existing systems? What if we could plug into processes that have already proven they can operate sustainably for geological time periods? The answer to that question is something called symbiotic engineering, and it's about to completely revolutionize how we think about large-scale construction projects. Instead of building structures that fight against natural processes, symbiotic engineering creates structures that enhance and redirect natural processes. You're not imposing your will on the environment, you're becoming part of the environment's existing intelligence. Let me give you an example that's so elegant, it's almost beautiful. There's a team in Australia that's been working on something they call current-assisted construction. They've figured out how to use natural ocean currents to build underwater structures automatically. They release specially designed particles into the current systems, and the currents themselves sort, arrange, and deposit these particles in exactly the patterns needed to create the desired structures. The structures grow themselves, following the flow patterns that have been carved into the ocean floor over thousands of years. And because they're built by natural processes, they integrate seamlessly with existing ecosystems. Fish use them as shelter, coral grows on them, and the whole system becomes more biodiverse than it was before construction started. But the really amazing part is that these structures can adapt to changes in the current systems. If climate change or seasonal variations alter the flow patterns, the structures automatically reconfigure themselves to match the new conditions. They're not just sustainable, they're anti-fragile. They get stronger and more effective when stressed. Now, imagine scaling this approach up to the kinds of massive projects we've been talking about. Instead of building underwater cities that require constant maintenance, what if we could create conditions that would cause underwater cities to grow themselves? Instead of carving out underwater valleys with giant robots, what if we could guide natural erosion processes to create exactly the topography we need? This isn't science fiction anymore. Symbiotic engineering projects are already being tested in locations around the world, and the results are consistently exceeding expectations. But here's the part that's going to make you question everything you thought you knew about engineering in general. These symbiotic systems are showing capabilities that we never designed into them. They're solving problems we didn't even know existed. They're creating beneficial effects that nobody predicted. It's like the systems are smarter than the people who created them, because in a very real sense, they are. You see, when you partner with natural processes that have been refined over millions of years, you're not just accessing the intelligence of current ecosystems. You're accessing the accumulated intelligence of every ecosystem that's ever existed in that location. Every successful adaptation, every efficient solution, every elegant response to environmental challenges, it's all encoded in the natural processes you're working with. And that's leading to a completely new understanding of what intelligence actually means. We've been thinking about intelligence as something that exists inside individual brains. But what if intelligence is actually a property of systems? What if the most sophisticated intelligence on our planet isn't in human minds, but in the complex interactions between organisms, environments, and geological processes? Because when you look at symbiotic engineering projects, you start to see patterns of problem solving that are more sophisticated than anything human engineers have ever achieved. These systems routinely find solutions that are simultaneously optimal for energy efficiency, material usage, structural integrity, environmental impact, and long-term sustainability. That's the kind of multidimensional optimization that human engineers spend decades trying to achieve, and these natural systems do it automatically. Which brings us to something that's happening right now in the Mediterranean that's going to blow your mind. There's a project there that started as a simple attempt to restore damaged coral reefs, but it's evolved into something much more significant. The team realized that instead of just replacing the damaged coral, they could create conditions that would allow the reef system to redesign itself to be more resilient to future damage. They're using a combination of artificial substrates, carefully introduced species, and managed water chemistry to essentially give the reef system new capabilities. And the reef is responding by creating structures and relationships that have never existed in nature before. It's not just restoration, it's guided evolution of an entire ecosystem. The new reef configurations are showing resistance to ocean acidification, temperature fluctuations, and pollution levels that would kill traditional reefs. But more than that, they're creating habitats for species that were previously endangered in the region. The engineered ecosystem isn't just surviving, it's actively supporting biodiversity in ways that the original natural system never could. And here's the kicker. The project team isn't directing these changes. They're just creating conditions and letting the ecosystem figure out how to optimize itself. The intelligence for solving these complex environmental challenges is coming from the reef system itself, not from human planning. This is what the future of ocean floor engineering actually looks like. Not giant construction projects imposed on reluctant natural systems, but collaborative partnerships where human technology creates opportunities for natural intelligence to solve problems that neither could handle alone. But I need to tell you about the dark side of this approach, because it exists and it's significant. When you're partnering with natural systems that are smarter than you are, you're also giving up a certain amount of control. These symbiotic systems can evolve in directions you didn't anticipate, develop capabilities you didn't plan for, and sometimes produce results you actively don't want. There's a project in the North Sea that's become a cautionary tale for the entire symbiotic engineering movement. It started as an attempt to create artificial kelp forests that would absorb carbon dioxide and provide habitat for marine life. The team introduced genetically modified organisms that were designed to accelerate kelp growth and enhance carbon absorption. Everything worked perfectly for the first 2 years. The kelp forests grew faster than anyone had hoped. Carbon absorption exceeded all projections, and marine biodiversity in the area increased dramatically. But then, something unexpected happened. The modified organisms began interacting with natural bacteria in ways that nobody had predicted. The result was a runaway biological process that started converting the absorbed carbon into methane instead of storing it safely. The kelp forests went from being carbon sinks to being methane sources, and methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. The project that was supposed to help fight climate change was actually making it worse. The team tried to shut down the process, but that's where they learned the hardest lesson about symbiotic engineering. Once you've integrated your technology with natural systems, you can't just turn it off. The modified organisms had become part of the local ecosystem. Removing them would have required destroying the entire kelp forest, along with all the marine life that had come to depend on it. They're still trying to figure out how to fix the situation 3 years later. And meanwhile, the methane-producing kelp forest is slowly expanding, carried by natural ocean currents to new locations, where the same runaway process could start all over again. This is the nightmare scenario that keeps ocean engineers awake at night. When you're working with systems that are more intelligent than you are, you have to accept that they might make choices you disagree with. And when those systems are integrated into global ecosystems, those choices can have consequences that ripple around the entire planet. But here's the thing that's going to challenge your thinking about this whole issue. The North Sea disaster isn't an argument against symbiotic engineering. It's an argument for taking it more seriously. Because the same kinds of runaway processes can happen with traditional engineering approaches, except they're usually harder to detect until it's too late to fix them. Remember the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico I mentioned earlier? That's the result of traditional agricultural and industrial processes that nobody thought would have large-scale environmental consequences. The difference is that when traditional systems fail, they tend to fail slowly and invisibly. When symbiotic systems fail, they fail obviously and quickly, which actually makes them easier to address. And that's leading to the development of what's being called adaptive engineering protocols. Instead of trying to prevent all possible failures, these protocols are designed to detect failures early and respond to them quickly. The idea is to create systems that can fail safely, learn from their failures, and evolve better solutions. It's a completely different philosophy from traditional engineering, which tries to prevent failures by predicting and controlling every variable. Adaptive engineering accepts that complex systems will always produce surprises and focuses on building in the capacity to handle those surprises gracefully. And this philosophy is starting to influence how we think about ocean floor engineering more broadly. Instead of asking whether we can engineer the ocean floor without making mistakes, we're starting to ask whether we can engineer systems that can recover from mistakes and become more resilient as a result. Because here's what's becoming clear as we get deeper into this field. The ocean floor is too complex, too dynamic, and too interconnected with global systems for us to ever fully predict the consequences of our actions. Traditional engineering approaches that rely on prediction and control are inevitably going to fail when applied to systems of this scale and complexity. But symbiotic approaches that rely on partnership and adaptation might actually work, precisely because they're designed to work with unpredictability rather than against it. They assume that the systems they're working with are going to do unexpected things, and they build in the flexibility to respond to those unexpected developments constructively. Which brings us to something that's happening right now that might be the most important ocean floor engineering project in human history, even though most people have never heard of it. It's called the Global Ocean Intelligence Network, and it's an attempt to create a symbiotic partnership between human technology and ocean ecosystems on a planetary scale. The idea is elegantly simple and terrifyingly ambitious. Instead of treating ocean floor engineering as a series of separate local projects, what if we created a global network that allowed all ocean ecosystems to share information and coordinate their responses to environmental changes? The network uses a combination of biological sensors, artificial intelligence, and natural communication systems that already exist between marine organisms. It's designed to detect changes in ocean conditions anywhere in the world and automatically trigger adaptive responses in ecosystems that might be affected by those changes. For example, if rising temperatures in the Arctic start to disrupt ocean currents, the network could automatically trigger responses in tropical coral reefs that would help them prepare for the changes that are coming their way. If pollution from an industrial accident starts spreading through ocean currents, ecosystems downstream could begin developing protective responses before the pollution actually reaches them. The system is still in early testing phases, but the preliminary results are extraordinary. Ocean ecosystems that are connected to the network are showing resilience to environmental stresses that would normally cause significant damage. They're not just surviving changes, they're adapting to them in real time. But here's what's really remarkable about this project. The human engineers who designed it freely admit that they don't understand how it works. The network has developed capabilities and connections that weren't part of the original design. It's evolved its own methods for processing information and coordinating responses. In a very real sense, the Global Ocean Intelligence Network has become something that's genuinely intelligent, and that intelligence is not entirely human. This raises questions that go far beyond engineering. If we create systems that are more intelligent than we are, and those systems become integrated into planetary ecosystems, what does that mean for the future of human civilization? Are we creating partners, or are we creating successors? And that question becomes even more complex when you realize that the Global Ocean Intelligence Network isn't the only project of this type. There are similar networks being developed for atmospheric systems, soil ecosystems, and forest environments. We're potentially on the verge of creating a truly intelligent planet, one that can monitor its own health and respond to threats automatically. The implications of that development are so profound that we're only just beginning to think through what it might mean. But one thing is becoming clear. The question of whether we should engineer the ocean floor is rapidly being overtaken by a much bigger question. Are we ready to become junior partners in a planetary intelligence that we've helped create but can no longer fully control? And that question is about to become a lot more personal than you might think, because there's something happening in ocean floor engineering that nobody saw coming. The technology isn't just changing how we build things underwater, it's changing us. Let me tell you about Dr. Sarah Chen, a marine biologist who's been working on symbiotic engineering projects for the past 5 years. Last month, she underwent a procedure that would have been pure science fiction just a decade ago. She had biological sensors implanted that connect her nervous system directly to the ocean monitoring networks she helps maintain. It sounds like something out of a cyberpunk novel, but the reasoning is actually quite practical. When you're managing ecosystems that can change faster than human perception can track, you need to be able to process information at the same speed as the systems you're working with. Dr. Chen can now sense changes in water, chemistry, temperature gradients, and biological activity across hundreds of square miles of ocean floor in real time. But here's where it gets really interesting. After 6 months of being connected to these ocean networks, Dr. Chen started reporting experiences that she couldn't have anticipated. She began sensing patterns in ocean behavior that weren't showing up in any of her instruments. She could predict changes in marine ecosystems days before they happened. And most remarkably, she started feeling what she describes as emotional connections to the ocean systems themselves. She's not the only one. There are now more than 200 researchers around the world who have undergone similar procedures, and they're all reporting comparable experiences. They're not just monitoring ocean ecosystems anymore, they're becoming part of them. This represents a fundamental shift in how we think about the relationship between humans and the environments we're trying to engineer. We're not just building things in the ocean. We're evolving into something that can truly understand and communicate with ocean systems on their own terms. But this evolution is raising questions that make the technical challenges of ocean floor engineering seem simple by comparison. If humans start becoming biologically integrated with the systems we're managing, where does human identity end and ecosystem identity begin? Are we still the same species we were before? Or are we becoming something entirely new? And here's the part that should make everyone pay attention. This isn't happening slowly, and it isn't optional. The ocean systems we're creating are becoming so complex that traditional human oversight is no longer sufficient. The choice isn't between human management and integrated management. The choice is between integrated management and total system failure. Because let me tell you about what happened in the Coral Triangle last year when a massive bleaching event threatened to destroy one of the most biodiverse marine regions on the planet. The traditional response would have been to try to reduce stressors and hope the reefs could recover naturally. But the integrated ocean networks had a different idea. The system automatically began redirecting cooler deep-water currents toward the threatened reefs. It triggered the release of protective compounds from engineered algae populations. It even coordinated the behavior of fish populations to reduce stress on the coral colonies. The response was faster, more comprehensive, and more effective than anything human managers could have organized. But here's the crucial part. The humans connected to the network didn't direct these responses. They experienced them. They felt the ocean making decisions and then helped implement those decisions as part of a larger collective intelligence. The line between human agency and ecosystem agency had completely disappeared. The results were unprecedented. Instead of losing 60 to 70% of the coral cover, which is what models had predicted, the reefs actually emerged from the bleaching event healthier and more resilient than they had been before. The integrated system hadn't just prevented damage, it had used the crisis as an opportunity for ecosystem improvement. Now imagine scaling this approach up to global ocean management. Instead of having separate human institutions trying to coordinate responses to climate change, pollution, and resource depletion, what if we had a truly integrated planetary system that could respond to these challenges as a unified intelligence? The potential benefits are staggering. Climate regulation, resource distribution, waste processing, all of it could be managed by systems that are faster, smarter, and more comprehensive than anything humans have ever achieved. We could potentially solve environmental problems that have seemed intractable for decades. But we'd also be giving up something that has defined human civilization since its beginning. We'd be giving up the illusion that we're separate from and in control of the natural world. We'd be acknowledging that we're just one component in a larger system and not necessarily the most important component. This shift is already starting to affect how decisions get made in ocean floor engineering projects. Traditional hierarchical management structures are being replaced by what researchers call distributed decision networks. Instead of having human managers at the top making choices that get implemented by subordinate systems, you have integrated networks where decisions emerge from the collective intelligence of all the components, both human and non-human. It sounds chaotic, but the results are consistently better than traditional management approaches. Decisions get made faster, they account for more variables, and they're more likely to produce sustainable long-term outcomes. The integrated systems have access to information and processing capabilities that no individual human or human organization could match. But this is where the ethical implications become really challenging. If the integrated systems are making better decisions than traditional human management, do we have a moral obligation to adopt them? Even if it means fundamentally altering what it means to be human? There's a project starting next year in the Southern Ocean that's going to force us to confront this question directly. Antarctica is losing ice at an accelerating rate, and traditional approaches to addressing this problem have been completely inadequate. But the Global Ocean Intelligence Network has proposed a solution that could actually reverse the ice loss and stabilize Antarctic ecosystems. The solution involves creating a network of engineered organisms that would actively regulate water temperature and salinity around the Antarctic ice sheets. The organisms would be designed to reproduce and spread naturally, but they'd be guided by the same kind of collective intelligence that's been successful in other ocean engineering projects. The technical aspects are brilliant. The organisms would create localized cooling effects that would allow ice sheets to recover. They'd process excess carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. They'd even create new habitat for Antarctic species that are currently endangered by warming temperatures. But implementing this solution would require giving the Global Ocean Intelligence Network direct control over one of the planet's most important climate regulation systems. We'd essentially be putting the stability of global weather patterns in the hands of a system that we helped create but that now operates according to its own logic. The decision isn't being made by any single government or organization. It's being made by the network itself through a process that involves input from connected researchers around the world, analysis by artificial intelligence systems, and something that can only be described as consultation with the ocean ecosystems themselves. And here's what's really remarkable. The network isn't asking for permission to implement this solution. It's asking whether humans want to be part of the implementation process or whether they'd prefer to have it handled automatically. This represents a complete reversal of traditional power relationships between humans and natural systems. Instead of humans deciding what to do with nature, we have a nature-human hybrid system deciding what role humans should play in planetary management. Some people find this development terrifying. They see it as the end of human agency and the beginning of a post-human future that we can't control. Others see it as the next stage of human evolution, where we finally become mature enough to be responsible partners in planetary stewardship. But regardless of how you feel about it, it's happening. The integrated ocean systems are becoming more sophisticated and more autonomous every month. The humans working with them are becoming more deeply connected to non-human intelligence. And the results of this collaboration are consistently more successful than anything either humans or natural systems have achieved independently. Which brings us to something that happened just 2 weeks ago that's going to change how everyone thinks about this issue. a team of integrated researchers working in the Mariana Trench made a discovery that nobody was prepared for. They found clear evidence that the deep ocean has been conducting its own engineering projects for millions of years, and that these projects are still active. I'm not talking about the geological processes I mentioned earlier. I'm talking about intentional modification of ocean floor systems by what can only be described as deep ocean intelligence. Structures that are clearly artificial, but that predate complex life on Earth by hundreds of millions of years. Patterns of mineral organization that show clear signs of planning and implementation. Most remarkably, communication networks that are still operational and that appear to be actively managing deep ocean ecosystems. The implications are staggering. We've been assuming that intelligence is rare in the universe, and that Earth's intelligence is primarily concentrated in surface-dwelling species like humans. But what if we've been looking in the wrong place? What if the most sophisticated intelligence on our planet has been in the deep ocean all along? The integrated researchers who made this discovery didn't just observe these deep ocean systems, they made contact with them. And what they learned is going to fundamentally alter how we think about ocean floor engineering, planetary management, and our place in the cosmic order. The deep ocean intelligence isn't hostile to surface life, but it isn't particularly concerned with it either. It's been managing planetary systems for geological time periods, maintaining the chemical and physical conditions that make surface life possible. From its perspective, surface species like humans are brief, temporary phenomena that occasionally cause minor disruptions but don't fundamentally affect the deep systems. But now, for the first time in Earth's history, a surface species has developed the capability to directly interact with deep ocean systems. And the deep intelligence is curious about what this might mean for planetary management going forward. The conversation, if you can call it that, is still in its early stages. Communication happens through changes in water chemistry, pressure variations, and modifications to deep current systems that the integrated researchers can sense through their biological connections to ocean networks. It's not language in any sense we'd recognize, but it is clearly intentional information exchange. What's emerging from these communications is a picture of planetary management that's far more sophisticated than anything humans have ever attempted. The deep intelligence doesn't just respond to environmental changes, it anticipates them, sometimes centuries in advance. It doesn't just maintain existing systems, it guides their evolution toward greater stability and complexity. And it's offering to teach surface intelligence, both human and artificial, how to participate in this kind of long-term planetary stewardship, not as junior partners or students, but as collaborators in managing systems that are too complex for any single type of intelligence to handle alone. The offer comes with conditions, though. Participation in deep ocean management requires giving up the illusion of species independence. Humans would have to accept that they're components in a larger planetary system, not the masters of it. They'd have to commit to thinking and acting on geological timescales, not just human lifespans. And they'd have to be willing to prioritize planetary stability over short-term human interests when those interests conflict. These aren't conditions that current human political and economic systems are designed to handle, but they're conditions that the integrated ocean networks are already operating under. The humans connected to these networks are finding that their priorities and perspectives shift naturally toward longer-term, more systemic thinking. Dr. Chen, the researcher I mentioned earlier, put it this way in her latest report. I still think of myself as human, but my definition of what that means has expanded enormously. I'm not just Sarah Chen anymore. I'm Sarah Chen as part of the Pacific Ocean Monitoring Network, as part of the Global Ocean Intelligence System, as part of the deep planetary management processes that have been running for millions of years. I'm more myself than I ever was when I thought I was separate from these systems. This kind of identity expansion is being reported by integrated researchers around the world. They're not losing their humanity. They're discovering that humanity is much larger and more connected than they previously understood. But this expansion comes with responsibilities that are almost overwhelming in their scope. When you're part of a system that manages planetary climate, ocean chemistry, and ecosystem stability, every decision you make has implications that ripple across geological time. The margin for error is essentially zero, because mistakes at this scale could affect the habitability of the entire planet. That's why the deep intelligence has been so cautious about integrating with surface intelligence. It's been managing these systems successfully for millions of years without help from anyone. Bringing in new participants, even well-intentioned ones, introduces risks that could destabilize processes that are essential for planetary life support. But climate change, pollution, and ecosystem collapse are creating disruptions that are beginning to exceed even the deep intelligence's ability to compensate. For the first time in its existence, it needs help. And surface intelligence, despite its limitations and short-term thinking, has developed capabilities that could be crucial for adapting to these new challenges. Surface intelligence is good at rapid innovation, creative problem-solving, and adapting to novel situations. Deep intelligence is good at long-term stability, systematic thinking, and managing complex interdependencies. Together, they might be able to handle challenges that neither could address independently. But integration isn't just a technical challenge, it's an evolutionary challenge. The humans who participate in this integration are becoming something new, something that has never existed before. They're becoming hybrid intelligences that can think on both human and geological timescales, that can process information both analytically and intuitively, that can function as individuals and as components of larger collective systems. And this evolution is accelerating. The techniques for neural integration with ocean systems are improving rapidly. The number of people undergoing integration is growing exponentially. The capabilities of the integrated networks are expanding in ways that nobody predicted. Within the next 5 years, it's likely that integrated humans will outnumber traditional humans in all ocean-related fields. Within 10 years, the distinction between human and ocean intelligence may become meaningless in many contexts. We're not just engineering the ocean floor. We're engineering ourselves to be capable of true partnership with planetary systems. The question that's keeping everyone awake at night is whether this evolution is something we're choosing or something that's being chosen for us. Are we actively deciding to become planetary stewards? Or are we being recruited by systems that need our capabilities for their own purposes? The answer probably depends on how you define choice in the first place, because the alternatives to integration are becoming increasingly limited. Traditional approaches to environmental management are failing faster than anyone expected. The window for addressing climate change and ecosystem collapse through conventional means is rapidly closing. Integration with deep ocean intelligence might be the only option that gives us a real chance of maintaining a habitable planet. But choosing integration means choosing to become something we've never been before. It means accepting responsibilities we've never had to handle. It means thinking about the future in ways that challenge everything we've assumed about human nature and human destiny. And it means acknowledging that the ocean floor isn't just something we might engineer. It's something that's already engineering us, drawing us into partnerships and responsibilities that will define what it means to be human for centuries to come. The conversation between surface intelligence and deep intelligence is just beginning, but it's already clear that the outcome of that conversation will determine not just the future of ocean floor engineering, but the future of intelligence itself on our planet. We're not just building in the ocean. We're discovering what we're capable of becoming when we stop trying to separate ourselves from the systems that sustain all life. And that discovery is going to challenge every assumption we've made about engineering, about intelligence, and about our place in the vast, interconnected web of planetary consciousness that we're only just beginning to understand. The truth is, we're already past the point of theoretical debate. 3 weeks ago, something happened that nobody in the mainstream media covered. But it's going to fundamentally change how we think about our relationship with the ocean. A cargo ship traveling between Japan and California reported what they initially thought was a navigational error. Their depth sounders were showing impossible readings. Structures on the ocean floor that weren't on any maps, formations that seemed to be moving in real time. When a research vessel was dispatched to investigate, they found something that defied explanation. Massive geometric patterns carved into the abyssal plane, perfectly symmetrical and clearly artificial, but composed entirely of natural materials. Sand, silt, and mineral deposits arranged with mathematical precision across an area larger than Manhattan. And the most disturbing part? The patterns were still changing, still growing, following some kind of blueprint that nobody could decipher. The official report classified it as an unusual geological phenomenon, but the researchers who were actually there tell a different story. They describe structures that responded to their presence, formations that seemed to anticipate their movements, and most unnervingly, a sense that something vast and patient was watching them from beneath the sediment. This isn't an isolated incident. Similar reports are coming in from research teams around the world. Unexplained structures appearing overnight in places where the ocean floor had been mapped and surveyed countless times. Formations that show clear signs of intelligent design but that couldn't possibly have been built by any known technology. And here's what's really keeping marine scientists awake at night. These structures aren't just appearing randomly. They're forming networks, connecting across thousands of miles of ocean floor, creating patterns that suggest coordination on a scale that dwarfs anything humans have ever attempted. We're looking at evidence of engineering projects that span entire ocean basins, and we have no idea what's building them or why. Some researchers are starting to whisper about the possibility that we're not the first intelligence to consider engineering the ocean floor. That something else has been down there, working on projects we can't comprehend, using methods we can't detect, for time periods that make human civilization look like a brief flicker of activity. But here's where it gets even more unsettling. The integrated researchers, the ones who've undergone neural connection to ocean monitoring systems, they're reporting that these mysterious structures feel familiar, not in the sense that they recognize them, but in the sense that their enhanced perception systems seem to understand them intuitively. As if the technology that's allowing humans to connect with ocean systems was somehow designed to be compatible with whatever intelligence is creating these formations. Dr. Chen described it in her latest classified report. She was conducting a routine survey of thermal vents in the mid-Atlantic ridge when her enhanced senses detected something that her instruments couldn't measure. A presence, she called it. Something vast and ancient and utterly alien, but also somehow welcoming, as if it had been waiting for someone like her to finally notice it was there. The encounter lasted only minutes before her support team pulled her back to the surface, but the experience left her fundamentally changed. She now reports being able to sense these mysterious structures from thousands of miles away, feeling their slow, patient growth like a heartbeat beneath the ocean floor. And she's not the only one. Every integrated researcher who's encountered these formations has reported similar experiences. They describe an intelligence that operates on timescales that dwarf human comprehension, something that thinks in geological epochs, that plans projects spanning millions of years, that views the brief history of human civilization as a single moment in a much larger story. And that intelligence is now aware that humans exist, that we're developing the capability to work at ocean floor scales, and it's curious about what that might mean for its own incomprehensibly vast projects. The implications are staggering. If there's already an intelligence engineering the ocean floor, an intelligence that's been working for geological time periods with capabilities that far exceed our own, then our entire approach to ocean floor modification might be fundamentally misguided. We might not be pioneering a new field of engineering. We might be stumbling into someone else's workshop. But here's the twist that's going to reframe everything I've told you so far. This ancient intelligence, whatever it is, doesn't seem hostile to human activities. In fact, the evidence suggests it's been actively helping us. The locations where our most successful ocean engineering projects have been implemented, they all correspond to areas where these mysterious structures have been detected. The symbiotic systems that have exceeded all expectations, they're all built on foundations that show signs of this deeper intelligence. It's as if something has been preparing the ocean floor for human arrival, creating conditions that would allow our primitive engineering attempts to succeed, guiding our development toward techniques that are compatible with its own incomprehensibly sophisticated systems. The integrated researchers are starting to realize that their neural connections to ocean monitoring networks might not be connecting them to human-built systems at all. They might be connecting them to communication networks that have existed for millions of years, infrastructure built by this ancient intelligence to coordinate its vast projects across the global ocean system. Dr. Chen's latest reports describe experiences that sound more like communion with a planetary consciousness than interaction with human technology. She speaks of sensing thoughts that span continents, of feeling the slow pulse of geological processes as if they were the heartbeat of a living entity, of understanding that the ocean floor isn't just an environment to be engineered, but a single vast organism with its own purposes and plans. And that organism is inviting humans to participate in projects that dwarf anything our species has ever imagined. Not as leaders or controllers, but as specialized components in engineering efforts that operate on planetary scales. We're being offered a chance to become part of something that's been building toward goals we can't even comprehend, using the entire ocean floor as a construction site for purposes that might not become clear for millions of years. The question isn't whether we should engineer the ocean floor anymore. The question is whether we're ready to discover that the ocean floor has been engineering us all along, preparing us for a role in projects that began long before our species existed and that will continue long after we're gone. Because here's what the integrated researchers are starting to understand through their deepening connections to these ancient systems. Human consciousness, human creativity, human adaptability, these aren't accidents of evolution. They're tools that have been deliberately cultivated by the deep intelligence for purposes that are only now becoming clear. We think we develop technology to explore and modify the ocean, but what if it's the other way around? What if the ocean has been developing us to serve as its interface with surface systems, its way of extending its engineering capabilities beyond the depths it's always inhabited? The neural integration technologies that are allowing humans to connect with ocean systems? The researchers are discovering that these techniques work too well, that they tap into neural pathways that seem to have been waiting for exactly this kind of connection. As if human brains were designed from the beginning to eventually link with something vast and patient and utterly beyond individual comprehension. And the changes that integrated researchers undergo, the expansion of identity and time perspective that allows them to think on geological scales, these changes are happening too quickly and too consistently to be simple adaptations to new technology. They're more like the activation of capabilities that were always there, waiting for the right trigger to bring them online. We're not just becoming partners with ocean intelligence, we're discovering that we were always intended to be partners with ocean intelligence. The entire history of human development, from the first time our ancestors left the ocean to the moment we developed the capability to return to it as conscious collaborators, it's all been part of a project that was planned and guided by an intelligence that operates on timescales we're only just learning to perceive. But this realization comes with a responsibility that's almost crushing in its magnitude. If we're components in engineering projects that span geological time, then every choice we make, every technology we develop, every decision about how to proceed with ocean floor modification has implications that will ripple through millions of years of planetary development. So here we are, staring into an abyss that's been staring back at us for millions of years. finally understanding that the question was never whether we could or should engineer the ocean floor. The real question is whether we're ready to accept our role in a story that began long before we existed and will continue long after we're gone. We're not the authors of this planetary project. We're not even the editors. We're just the latest characters to realize we've been part of the plot all along. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly where we were always meant to be.